Last time, we ended our discussion with discussing the stages of life, the 4 stages of life that would be typical for a young male, what a male life would be in the Brahmin caste, the highest caste. So it's a kind of an ideal standard, but it is reflective of the stages of life that somebody would normally go into, have. Here we have stages of life. I'm in the stage of life where I probably really should be retired and not doing this, but I love doing this. And what else would I do? I spent my whole life focused on this. So, but I'm a senior citizen. I'm in the ending stage of my life. Previous to that, I was just a person who had a family and family responsibilities. Previous to that, I was a student. So those are basically the 3 stages of my life. Hinduism, there are 4 stages. It starts with being a student, then becoming a householder, then becoming a forest dweller, where you really begin to focus, you leave your life behind for the most part, and you really begin to focus on your own spirituality. And then the final stage for someone who is really, really, really ready to escape from samsara in this lifetime, that final push of really renouncing everything about this life. And so that's the sannyasa, the wandering sage, which you saw some videos of when you watched the 330 Million Gods video. You saw an interview with that sannyasa. So keeping this student householder image in mind, which we have seen, hit the wrong button. There we go. There are 4 stages of life in the model. And then we can say that in each stage of life, one of the things that you're doing is you're fulfilling basic responsibilities, debts, duties in life. So these are referred to generally as the 3 debts. You have 3 debts in life. Your first debt, and basically, is by moving as a student and a householder, you fulfill all of these debts in life. All right. So in the first stage, you have a debt to the ancient seers, the ancient teachers, the ancient people who saw these things, understood these things, who communicated these things and passed them on. So that's, significant religious figures, right? So, all of us, we don't just come to know this stuff, boom, we learn it from other people, and other people have been, understanding and developing it. And so we all learn from someone. No one has the knowledge on their own. So there's this, in a sense, that when you're in a student and the householder stage, particularly in the student stage, you fulfill your debt, your duty, your responsibility, your accountability to the ancient seers. How do you do that? By studying what they wrote in the Vedas, what they passed on, the stories that they told, what they saw, what they came to understand. It becomes what we call sacred scripture, but these are the earliest of the scriptures, the Vedas. So this could be fulfilled in that period when you're a student. The next stage of life, when you begin to have a house, a family, a householder, well, now you can fulfill, now because you have learned your basic duties and responsibilities in life, now you can begin to fulfill your debt or your duty to the gods. And how do you do that? By worshiping the gods, by making offerings to the gods, by interacting with the various gods. And there are a gazillion ways to do that, but so that responsibility, that duty in life, that moral, ethical, essential responsibility, what you need to fulfill, is fulfilled by being a householder. You're paying the debt to the gods. This is really simple. I'm over explaining it. And then thirdly, you can repay your debt to your ancestors in the householder stage by having a son. Notice I didn't say having a daughter. We will deal with that next week. But all this is modeled on the male model, and we're going to deal with this strange, troubling issue of really second-class citizenship for women. And it's actually worse than second-class citizenship that is part of the Hindu culture and tradition. Now, it's getting much better, but it's still lagging behind other modern peoples. So anyway, we'll talk about that. But just in the strict understanding, this is all based on a masculine model. So you fulfill your duty to your ancestors by having a son as a householder. And that son will continue to perform the ancestral rites. So you respect your ancestors, you teach your son to respect their ancestors. And that way, when you're not there, when you're, move on to your next life, right? Your son will continue to respect your ancestors for you. So you're fulfilling your duty or your debt to your ancestors. This is another way to understand what's going on in these stages of life. And we're looking for what's happening on the inside. We're not really focusing. My focus in all of this course is more philosophical than it is practical. I want to focus on the ideas, what people are thinking, why they're doing what they're doing, more than all the details of what they're doing. Because that's, with so many people and, 8 billion people in the world, even if you only study a couple of, major groups of religions, it's just too much to talk about every single practice and what they're doing. It's better to have just an understanding of what their viewpoint is. And then you can understand. That gives you understand what one of the things that my mother used to say to me all the time when I would do something that was just screwy, she would say to me, "What were you thinking?" She was not so upset that I had done something that was screwy. She was upset that I was thinking screwy, that what would lead me to take this action? What in the world were you thinking? And a lot of times I wasn't thinking, but often I was thinking and it was wrong, and it resulted in a wrong action. So that's what we want to do it here. We want to understand what people are thinking. Why do they, what are they thinking when they make the decisions that they do in life? What are they thinking when they interact with other people and whatever the result is? What are they thinking when they think about God, when they think about themselves? This is this internal dialogue that goes on in every human being. And that's really what we want to know. When you meet somebody else, well, I always ask them, "Oh, what do you do?" I mean, if you don't meet them on campus, but I mean, even if you do, you meet another student and you know that they're a student and you say, "Hey, what do you do?" Well, when you're in your, late teens, early 20s, what I do is I'm a student and I work over here. And it's obviously probably not a very fulfilling career, but it's a job. You're doing what you can. And so and then as you get older, you run into people who are out in the world living and you say, "Hi, pleased to meet you." "Oh, what do you do for a living?" It's usually the first thing we say. "What do you do for a living?" A smart ass answer, which would be something I would come up with, would be, "I live." That's a real smart ass answer, right? Okay. So, but that's showing, I could say, "Okay, I teach. I'm a teacher." "Oh, you're a teacher." Well, that's not all I am. That's just what I do, but that's what you asked me. "Oh, what else do you do?" Well, I play guitar. "Okay, that's what I'm doing, but you haven't asked me about me yet. You've asked me about everything that's external to me, but you haven't come to even begin to know who I am, what I think, how I feel, how I view the world, how I'm viewing this encounter, all that." That's what we're trying to do when we study religion. So we focus on the ideas, the central ideas that inform people, because we live by what we think. Anyway, so this is just another way of describing what people are thinking about when they are living their lives. So 3 debts is one way to understand the thinking that's going on. Here's how they relate to those who have come before them. All right, so another way to look at, another thing that happens when we're in the talking about this, well, what, okay, what are the four aims or goals of life? We know the stages, we know our sense of duty, but what are we actually pointing to? What is our goal? I mean, we're walking along, we're living life, we're moving through life, we're living, but where are we headed? Everybody's headed somewhere. Everybody has some sort of a goal in their mind. Some people will pretend, oh, I don't know, I just go with the flow, man, and well, even people who say that don't. Everybody has some sort of intention or goal or idea of what their life should be, what they want it to be, or even what it is, but they have an idea of a goal. It could be, I just want to get out of this apartment, or get out of the house and experience life on my own. That's a goal, right? So what are the goals or the aims of life? So the first goal that and I think we've already talked about Dharma a little bit. I have to run back here. Yeah, we talked about Dharma, right? The duty, responsibilities of ethics, destiny, right? This is your fate, God's plan for your life, the universe's plan for your life, and what you understand about that. So Dharma, the first goal of life, is to fulfill your duty, to fulfill your purpose for being alive. And so this is the application of duty, ethics, and destiny, which leads to harmony in your life as it begins to unfold as a student. That's the first stage, right? So you're already focused on your duty, your purpose, what life's all about for you. So that's the first goal or aim of life. Another goal, these are not necessarily in order. These are just, we could say A, B, C, and D. It just happens to be 1, 2, 3, and 4. So another goal that would be part of someone's inner conversation with themselves is what we call kama, which is desire. It means relishing. You have a goal to enjoy the human experience, to enjoy life, to relish the human spirit experience, and celebrate the sensual aspects of life. You are in a body. You aren't a body, but you are in a body, and that body has feelings. That body has sensual aspects of it. And, that's real obvious, when you're young, most of the sensual stuff is, really exciting. As you get older, some of the excitement fades, and now you get another feeling or sensual thing called pain. But I mean, that's, but anyway, we want to have the best. We want to have a good experience in the sensual aspects of life. By the way, you may have heard, there's actually a god, kama, which is the god of desire. 330 million gods, so there's a god for everything. But kama, you've probably heard this word before. Ever heard of a book called the Kama Sutra? I need to see faces here to see who's weak. There we go, Amar. He knows what Kama Sutra is. Anybody else got a smile for me? Okay, Stefan. Okay, Kama Sutra is a book that has diagrams of hundreds of sexual positions that will lead to greater enjoyment in sex. Sutra means teachings or truths. Basically, teachings that's probably the best way to translate it. And kama is desire, teaching you how to maximize your desire in sexual life. So, a 500 million years ago, almost 46 years ago, I think it's 46 years ago. Yeah, it is 46 years ago, about to be 47. But anyway, I got married. And, it wasn't the world that we live in today, where there's so much about sex that it actually can put you off. But there was no Pornhub or anything even close to that back when I was a teenager. Right. But when I got married, when I was 26 years old, I obviously knew something about sex. I'd had the conversation with my parents about the birds and the bees, but I never experienced that fully intimate relationship. And so, I had desire, but I didn't know any, I couldn't pursue it. So anyway, I picked up a copy. I went to a bookstore and picked up a copy of this book, the Kama Sutra, to learn a little bit about the physical act of sex. So anyway, it's desire. There's nothing wrong with desire. When we get to Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, we'll be talking about when God, the creation story in Genesis chapters, in the early chapters of Genesis. And the first command that God gave to Adam and Chava, you know them as Adam and Eve, close enough. The first command he gave them was be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. He was saying, get busy. People think that the fall in the garden was, oh, they had sex and that's why they were kicked out of the garden. No, it doesn't have anything to do with that. That was the command. Matter of fact, God also gave that command to the animals and the fish and the birds. Be fruitful and multiply. Get busy, enjoy yourself, live, and produce more life. Right. So anyway, there's nothing wrong with Kama. Unfortunately, in the West, we have been beaten down by kind of a Victorian attitude, a very strict attitude that has developed in Western morality that says that this is, there's something bad about this. There's nothing bad about it. Just like anything else, there are boundaries where it's going to work best. I mean, there's nothing bad about basketball. But if if your basketball court is next to a busy highway, you don't want to chase the ball out of bounds and and pick it up out of the busy highway because you're liable to get smashed. Right? So there are boundaries. And so anyway, we'll get to that. So, this is real living we're talking about here, not theories by a bunch of dried up scholars and intellectuals who couldn't get a date if their life depended on it. Okay. So that's a nasty comment, but just all right. So that's a goal of life, to fulfill, to experience everything that is good and part of living fully. So that is part of Hinduism, is to fully get the best out of living, including physical, sensual desires. Another one that a lot of people think, oh, we can't have this, artha, wealth, abundance. You have a duty to provide security for loved ones and to savor and share life's bounty as a household. Right? There's nothing wrong with having a lot of good stuff. And of course, people always say, well, the New Testament says that money is the root of all evil. No, that's not what it says in the Greek. That's a horrible English translation. Jesus said, as quoted in the New Testament, in the Gospels, is saying what he said he said it in Aramaic, but then was translated and written down in Greek. He said, the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. It's not the only, it's not all bad, but it's the love of the money, because you made money your love, what you adore, what you care about. And that leads to all kinds of evil. It even leads to what we call idolatry, where money becomes your God instead of God becoming your God, right? So there's nothing wrong with wealth and abundance. Now, greed is bad, but you don't have to be greedy. And you can be greedy and be poor. Matter some of the greediest people I know have the least, because they have a funny attitude. Anyway, so this artha. So this is a goal of life. And of course, the ultimate goal is escape. from this life, and to experience union with Brahman, unlimited union with Brahman, to lose yourself in the universal soul, to lose your soul in the universal soul. That's liberation, that's moksha, liberation, enlightenment, salvation, escape, freedom, whatever you want to call it. This last goal is attained by renunciation of your current lifetime, no matter how good it is, by cutting ties in the vanaprastha, the forest dweller, and the wandering sage, the sannyasin stage. So, and most people don't get there in most of their lives. This last one, you've got to have a lot of successful growing and maturing of the self, of the Atman, and a lot of good karma to get you to a position where you are actually even eligible to escape. All right, so anyway, I just think it's helpful to be aware of these things. This stuff is real. Sometimes we think religion, it's all ritual and it's not real, and it's just doing things that people have said that are the right things. That may be a lot of people's experience, but that's not what we're talking about in this course. And we're not talking about just philosophy in the sense that, okay, I think it. It's got to be lived, because you can think all kinds of things, but if you can't put it into action, what good is it? We'll see when we get to Christianity that the brother of Jesus, Jacob, whose name is mistranslated in the New Testament as James, writes a letter towards the end of the New Testament. It ends up in the organization of the New Testament towards the end, the letter of James, where he talks about faith. And he basically says that he actually does say literally, but he says a whole lot more than this, but he says his conclusion is faith, anything good, all this stuff, believing and trusting and worshiping God and having absolute confidence in God without works, without doing something, he says it's dead. It's just dead. It's non-operable. It's like a dead body. It's got it's like a perfect body, perfect faith, perfect body that's just laying there. It has no animation to it. So if no matter how good our thoughts are, no matter how much truth we are connected to, if we don't do something with it, what's the point? I've met people who take courses in all kinds of different academic areas, and they just want to know the stuff. They're just curious, and that's okay to be curious. But ultimately, if it's not something you can live, I don't think it's going to keep your focus. It's not going to continue to engage your curiosity. So some people become eternal students, or on any subject. You decide, what I need is a really good vehicle, good car. And you start researching those. Do I want gas guzzler? Do I want something that's efficient? I want a muscle car. Do I want something that's a little bit more efficient? Do I want a hybrid car? Do I want an electric car? I'm going to wait for a hydrogen car. All these type of things. And you really begin to research it, and you find out all these things and these options, and you just keep listening. Well, I think I kind of like this one, but I really want this package to go with it, and I want it with this color and all these different features. And that's fine to really research it, but eventually you got to go get in one and take it for a drive and see how it feels, see if you like it, and then you need to keep using it. That's when you buy it, right? So some people just shop all the time, just shop. They never buy anything. Look, I've been a salesman for much of my life. It's the way I've made my living for a whole lot of my life. You get people who are just shopping. Okay. That's automatic reaction. I do the same thing. You walk into a store, unusual thing these days to walk into a store. I've gotten so used to shopping online through the COVID pandemic, but you go into a store and you're just looking around and somebody comes up to you, your first response is just shopping. But there are a lot of people who just shop and they never buy. They never take anything and incorporate it in their lives and go and use it. So what you want to do with all these things is you want to get this information and you've got to be able to use it. And so this is what we're talking about. How do people live, right? What's the thinking? And then what is the result? And, you know, I know people who know, golly, so much about religion in general and certain religions specifically that I could never hope to have the kind of knowledge, the deep, intense knowledge that they have. But I also know that they don't live it. It's just an academic interest to them. But it doesn't do them any good. All right, so I've preached on that enough for tonight. That's a major sermon for tonight. But if you don't do something with it, what good is it? So first of all, we got to understand what's going on the inside, and then we can understand the actions that people take, because people will, for the most part, live what they think, or at least try to. All right, so those are the four goals or aims of life. It all sounds good to me. So anyway, all right, so the next subject that I want to talk about, and just briefly here, is a word that you're going to encounter when you encounter people from the Hindu persuasion. It's a philosophic. There's a word called darshana, or sometimes just darshan, but darshana, which comes from the Sanskrit, which means to view or to have a sight of. It's from the Sanskrit word. It's a derivative of the Sanskrit word DRS, which I can't pronounce because there are no vowels there, so I have no idea how to pronounce it, but which means to see. So a darshana is a vision, and specifically of God or a God or something divine, an apparition of something divine, or a glimpse of something divine, something supernatural, something outside of normal human experience. So, you know, and so darshana is described as an auspicious sight of a holy person, which somehow bestows merit on the person who's seen. Let me give you an illustration of what I'm talking about here. So I have a musician that I am just in awe of. Some of you may have heard of him. His name is John Petrucci. He's the lead guitar player for the progressive metal group called Dream Theater. Anybody know Dream Theater? Okay. Well, he's an absolutely phenomenal guitarist. Just scary good. But he's also, besides just being technically good, he really has incredible feel, writes beautiful songs, and particularly writes very complex stuff that just really you know, not only do I enjoy the music, the guy is a virtuoso musician, and he's in a band where every single one of them are virtuosos. I mean, they're seriously that good. But since I play guitar, I look at that and I'm just entranced by it. Now, I've been to a number of Dream Theater concerts. Pretty much anytime they come to Chicago, and for the last 12 years, something like that, I lived in downtown Chicago. And so right around, matter of fact, I lived one block from the Chicago Theater. So I could literally walk. And so I've been to see Dream Theater about 5 times over the last few years at Chicago Theater because they were there. And it's not such a huge venue that you're way back at the stadium listening to the rafters shake. That's you can get fairly close. Now I've been there to see him 5 times, but I've never met the guy. But I imagine what it would be like if I go to see him, but if we passed in a hall or on the street and I recognized who he was and approached him, I'm just making this up, and if he would actually notice me, or if he noticed me in the crowd and connected with me visually, and you could tell he's looking at me. There's something that is transmitted when somebody looks at you, when you catch somebody's eye, particularly when it's someone whom you admire, you feel like something spiritual happens, right? You get what I'm saying here? Well, this is the idea of darshan. It's to see the manifestation of the divine, let's just call it the God, but more importantly, to be seen by the God. So it's vision of you seeing the God and the God actually seeing you. And this is what happens in worship when someone brings an offering before an image. The God is believed to be taking up temporary residence in that image and can see you through its eyes. And so I don't know if you noticed this in the video, but typically Hindus, when they worship with their eyes open. They're usually seated, and and they look up at the God. What are they looking up at? Looking at the eyes. They're trying to see the God, but even more important is in the experience that they have a sense that the God sees them. That's a phenomenal blessing. It does something on the inside which is hard to explain. There's another way to explain this. There's someone else who you don't know, but you see them from time to time at school or wherever, and you're very attracted to this person. When you see them, you're happy. But you don't know them, you haven't met them, but all of a sudden one day, you see them and they turn around or turn your direction and see you. And there's a connection that takes place. That is powerful, right? That's a powerful experience when you look into somebody else's eyes and are not saying, oh, golly, they're attractive, but they're seeing you, and there's something spiritual that happens to this. By the way, just a little tip, since I already told you about the Kama Sutra, let me give you a little love tip. When you find somebody that you really, really care about, and let's say that you're in some sort of an embrace, don't close your eyes. Now, it's not easy to do. Matter of fact, you're probably even feeling a little bit comfortable now with me looking you in the eye. But there's something, but when it's somebody that you admire, that is an intense thing. Now, you may not be ready for that kind of intensity in a relationship, so better to close your eyes. Because there's something from the inside of you that connects to the inside of them. And that's what darshan is. That's what's happening in Hindu worship. It's not that they think that there's some magic. Oh, I'm sure there's some people who think it's magic, but they're actually, the idea is that they can actually experience real spiritual connection, real connection. They can actually experience the magic of being seen by the God, being recognized. Right? Okay, so that's what's known as darshana. And there's something about darshana, the one who has the greater position, the God, the divinity, actually bestows merit on you. There's something, it actually has a benefit. It actually produces good karmic results. So one of the ways to accumulate a lot of good karma is to spend a lot of time worshiping a God and letting them see you, because there's something that's transmitted there, and it's actually good karma or karmic merit. And we could all use more of that. All right, so anyway, that's what's going on in Hindu worship at the thought level. Right. So sight here means seeing or beholding and or being seen or beheld. And this word is commonly used to describe what we call a theophany, an appearance. Theos being in English, or from Greek, meaning God, and phanos, I guess, which means appearance, manifestation. Like manifestation, that is manifestation. Anyway, so it's related to it. Anyway, so it means manifestation or a vision of the divine. So when God shows up in any religious literature or story, that's what we call a theophany, an actual, where the God actually is physically manifested in some way. So darshan is commonly used for a theophany, a manifestation or a vision of the divine in Hindu worship. It can be of a deity, especially in the image form, or a very holy person or an artifact. You can still have this darshan experience even when it isn't represented as a physical being, just being in the presence of something holy. Right? It could be a holy mountain. It can be a holy stream. It can be, a holy tree. There's something of the divine in it that you recognize. That's why you call it holy. And just to observe it, somehow there's a connection there, just to see it. So you can receive darshana or a glimpse of the deity in the temple, or from a great saintly person, such as a great guru. All right, so that's just a little on darshan. As a matter of fact, a Hindu doesn't normally say, I'm going, they're on their way to the temple to worship. And they wouldn't say, if you say, hey, where are you going, man? So, oh, I'm going to the temple to worship. What they, more than likely, they would say, I'm going to the temple for darshan, to see this, to make this intimate seeing and being connection of seeing and being seen by the deity. All right, let's move on from that. And I don't think there's anything about that specifically in your book. I can't remember. It's not a very long explanation, so just want to say that. It does refer to darshana as a philosophy, a way of seeing. So darshana can also be used for philosophy or theology. It's a way of seeing. So the term also refers to the 6 systems of thought called darshanam that comprise classical Hindu philosophy. Now, the term implies how each of these 6 systems distinctly look at things and the scriptures in Indian philosophies. And so here's a list of these 6 major systems, viewpoints, philosophical viewpoints, philosophical theological viewpoints of life. Now, your book, well, so for instance, Buddhism, which we're going to be studying the week after next, and Jainism, which you should have already read about in the Hinduism chapter, they are examples of non-Hindu darshanas. They both start as Hindus. Buddhism starts as a Hindu offshoot. Jainism starts as a Hindu offshoot, but it becomes a different way of seeing things. So they're exact, but it's a view, it's a viewpoint. It's the way of seeing, it's the way of having a vision. So there's a different vision in Buddhism and in Jainism. So there's a similar way to think of this would be, say, in Christianity. There's the Roman Catholic darshana. There is the Eastern Orthodox darshana. There are bunches of Protestant darshanas, views. Baptist, Methodist, Episcopal, Presbyterian, Congregationalist, Reform, just Calvinist, all these different viewpoints. So they often thought of as like a system of philosophy or a system of theology within Christianity. Even in Judaism, we have the traditional, what we call Orthodox way of understanding and seeing things. Then there's the Reform way, which is extremely modernized and liberal and not as focused on tradition. And then there's what's known as conservative, which is right in the middle of the two. It's kind of a modern approach, a contemporary approach, not necessarily modern, but a contemporary approach. But they still value a lot of some of the ancient traditions that a lot of Jews have abandoned, And then there's Reconstructionism and humanistic and Hasidic and Haredi and ultra, just all kinds of different philosophies about what it means to be a Jew, or what it means to be a Christian, or what it means to be, in this case, a Hindu. We'll see in Buddhism, there are two major, probably three different Buddhist approaches, understandings. So anyway, we'll get to that. So in Hinduism, and in your book, there are a few pages, like 3 pages, where it talks about three Vedanta, which is end of the Vedas philosophy. It comes from these earliest writings. Sankhya, the Advaita Vedanta, and Vishista Advaita. I don't expect you to remember this. I don't normally remember this unless I'm reading it from my notes, but I will just summarize what it says in the book. The Sankhya school is the analysis or a dualistic school. It sees a dualistic universe of matter, prakriti, versus spirit, Purusha. So it's this dualistic thing of matter and spirit and how they interact. So this is kind of an overall understanding. This particular viewpoint denies the idea of any transcendent personal God. And in this viewpoint, the purpose of life is to isolate matter, prakriti, from spirit, Purusha. Just listen, you don't need to know this. It says that all humans have 3 primary material qualities or strands of material existence, which would be prakriti, matter, right? The first is sattva, which is purity, goodness, subtlety. Then there's rajas, which are passion, raw energy. And then there's tamas, which is darkness, kind of a dark inertia or grossness, largeness, but not a beautiful largeness. And gods are, and in this understanding, the gods are qualitatively similar to humans. Therefore, the incarnation of divinities in human form is part of the universe's natural processes. Just summarizing this, I mean, if you want to dig into this is fascinating to study. These are the 3 major schools that are really important. Then you have Advaita Vedanta, which is a monistic school. Monism means just focus on being, not a focus on beings, God beings, but just focus on ultimate being itself, not a being. And the founder of the school is Shankara, and he lived from 788 to 820 CE. Notice a lot of these people didn't live very long, but they had a lot of really deep thoughts when they were young. Don't think you have to be an old man to understand this stuff and to really, really dig into anything in life. At your age now is when you have your greatest power of thought. This is where the age that you're at now is where everything that is good and will propel life and society forward, you got it now. It's yours. So, I mean, you know, as you get older, your ability to think, remember, and do things begins to break down. So you're in a great position. Don't wait to become an old man. Matter of fact, I remember just when I was beginning back in 1969, when I was just really struggling with trying to, you know, figure out who I am and what I am. And I ran into, I was out in California, kind of hippieing it around, you know, just kind of, and I ended up at in Santa Cruz, and there was a boardwalk area next to the ocean, and I had gone to some sort of event at this boardwalk area that was spiritually related. But anyway, as I was leaving it, and leaving to go back to where I was staying, which was, I was going to have to hitchhike to get to, by the way, because it was about 10 miles away and somewhere else. But anyway, as I was leaving, I ran into a man who was probably in his 70s, like I am now. And, you know, gray hair, and a white beard, you know. And it was a real nice way. And we just, you know, got to chatting. You know, I didn't know who he was, and he didn't know who I was. So I kind of told him about, you know, this is what I'm doing, and, you know, I'm trying to find my way and find my purpose in life. And, you know, and he said, can I give you one piece of advice? Because I've been where you are. It's a great place to be where you are right now. Go for it. He says, but don't be in a hurry to be an old man. Don't be in a hurry. It'll get here fast enough. And then you won't have the energy and the ability to do anything. So don't wait. Do it now. Okay, anyway, second sermon of the evening. Okay. But anyway, so the universe is seen in this monistic school as being an impersonal spirit. Brahman is not a being, it is just impersonal being. And of course, Atman is Brahman. So the idea of Brahman Atman or Atman Brahman basically being the same is expressed in this understanding. Shankara says that the apparent difference between the spiritual and the physical worlds is just a pure illusion, Maya. We've already talked about Maya a little bit. Says that, you know, basically in the elementary stages of living, we relate to Brahman as a personal deity with characteristics such as powers and grace, what's known as Saguna Brahman. But ultimately, when you achieve moksha, you merge your soul with Nirguna Brahman, that is, and Brahman is understood to be a reality that has no personal characteristics. So you begin thinking of the ultimate as the ultimate God, a being. But as you grow, you realize that it isn't a being, it's being itself. That's Advaita Vedanta. This is all, you know, dealing with these same ideas. How do you connect this up? What do you do with this stuff? So then we've got Vishista Advaita, which is qualified monism. The person associated with this is Ramanuja, who lived, you know, in the, you know, 11th and 12th centuries. He actually had a pretty long life. But this is Hinduism that was really practical for the masses of people, very popular, easy to understand, easy to incorporate and to live. Basically, Ramanuja said you cannot perceive the divine except through the perceivable world. So everything in the world speaks of the divine. And the best bridge to ultimacy, which would be Brahman, is in the physical world, in the perceivable world, which is Vishnu. Now we're going to take a look at Vishnu and Vishnu's role in just a few minutes. But this is basically understands that each individual person is a fragment of Vishnu. And therefore, this encourages what we'll describe as bhakti yoga, which you may have read about, but we'll be talking about that soon, where you are devoted to a particular manifestation of deity, a god, and the best one they say is Vishnu. So you give your devotion, your loyalty, your adoration to that one deity, and that helps you make the transition to union with Brahman. It says that souls do not ultimately merge with Brahman, but that we actually maintain a separate non-difference, even in moksha. That's kind of going a lot deeper than we even need to go to today. But that's basically a summary of what was on those 3 or 4 pages, whatever it was. I usually don't even include this in a course. Sometimes I teach a course at another school where it is a focus on non-Western philosophy. And so there I'm dealing with Hinduism, Buddhism, and Chinese religions, and which are the foundations of non-Western stuff, and other things as well. But I deal with African traditional religions and stuff like that that are not in the Western mold. So anyway, this is enough for right now. So I normally, but in that course, I have time to go through this and develop it and really explore it in class and try and get some. So this is the 4th section of this course that I've taught this term. Since you guys started late, we're getting to this after I've completed it with all the others. I didn't even touch on this in the other classes. So I must have thought that you guys are super smart, super bright or something. Hopefully get something out of it. All right. You know what? It's 8 o'clock. I'm going at this for an hour. I think this is a perfect time for a break. In a minute, we're going to, well, we just talked about, Darshana, getting a vision or a glimpse of God, and maybe being seen by God. But I assume that we've all watched the 330 Million Gods video. But I think it's time to get a little bit more close up and personal with some of just to get a picture of how some of these important gods, some of the more important deities are pictured. So that's what we're going to do here. Now, I pulled all this information I'm about to talk about from these websites here. One of my favorite places is anything that's written by the 4 Dumbies. There are bunches of books and stuff out there, and so there's a book out there called Religion for Dummies. I have it here somewhere. It's very, very simple. It's really handy. It's just really, really basic stuff. And they actually have a website, and I found a really good some pictures and descriptions of some of the Hindu gods and goddesses. And there was also another website, Ancient History Lists, and Ancient History Lists. Well, there are 2 different ones that I use. One for basically some of the gods and some about 10 Hindu goddesses. So this is everything I'm showing you here is from these various links on the internet. So if you want to go in and dig it in, so dig it up. All right, let's move on here. So the first deity I'm going to take a peek at. Now, this is not Brahman. Brahman can't be pictured, can't be known. Brahman is being, not a being, right? But this is Brahma, the creator, usually referred to as Lord Brahma. Now, when I first started learning about Hinduism in an academic class, I was confused between this Brahma, who's the creator, created the universe, creates the world, and Brahman. And it took a little while before I actually began to understand them as distinct. Anyway, but this is not Brahman, it's just a similar sounding word. Just like there's the caste Brahmin, which is not the ultimate God, but it has this same basic root. So anyway, this deity, Brahman, is the creator. He's and frankly, he's not worshipped very much in India today. You won't find a temple that is dedicated to Lord Brahma, the creator, even though, I mean, that's a pretty important role to create the universe. But because basically he's semi-retired. He's created the universe. Now, periodically, the universe is destroyed and has to be created again. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. So he's basically on sabbatical right now. So what's the point of relating to him? There's really nothing he can do for you. So there's not a whole lot of focus on him. But anyway, he is important, and he's the first member of what's often referred to as the Hindu Trinity, the three of the most important gods out of the 330 million gods. This is actually known as the Trimurti, which we'll see in a couple of minutes. But in this group of three gods, we actually see creation, preservation, and destruction in their roles. And this is kind of something that goes on and on. We'll talk about that later. But anyway, so Brahma is the first member of this Trinity and is the creator because periodically he recreates everything in the universe. And periodically here refers to the Hindu belief that time is cyclical. Everything in the universe except for Brahman is created and maintained for a certain amount of time and then destroyed in order to be renewed in ideal form again. In other words, it kind of gets messed up in use and it needs to be, rehabbed, completely rebuilt. That's his job, important job. So you'll hear a lot about Brahma in Hinduism. Now, this is the one we've already mentioned. This is Vishnu, who is known as the preserver. Vishnu is a second member of this Trimurti, this Trinity. He maintains the order and harmony of the universe. So Lord Brahma creates the universe, and now Vishnu is the one who keeps it in working order, keeps it in balance, and keeps it in harmony. So this universe is periodically created by Brahma and periodically destroyed by Shiva, who we'll see in the next minute. So between Brahma and Shiva are all the responsibilities of Vishnu. This is one of the reasons when I mentioned Advaita Vedanta, it talks about Vishnu being the best bridge, because Vishnu is really the most present of deity, without getting lost in all because so Vishnu is worshipped in many forms and in a number of avatars. Now, an avatar is basically an incarnation of a god in some sort of form, where the god takes on incarnation. It would be enfleshment. It doesn't have to be a human being. There are 10 major incarnations of Vishnu where, for instance, just to give you an idea of what this is like, if you've seen the movie Avatar, which is coming out in the theaters again soon, and I think there's going to be another new Avatar as well that kind of could use the story, but that's the story, that's this fictional story, this fantasy story that takes place, in the future, in some distant planet, where we as, humans visit this planet, and it's inhabited by these people called the Na'vi, and these beings called the Na'vi. And what the humans do is they basically transfer their consciousness to bodies, the Na'vi bodies that they created, so they can interact with them. It's like, if you want to, go talk with a fish, well, you've got to be a fish, right? So the idea is Vishnu takes on human form or forms where it's easier to relate to them. So the Hindus view Jesus as an avatar of God the Father. And, that's what Christianity basically says, is that Jesus is God in the flesh, the God-man, right? So that's the concept of an avatar, right? Is the God becoming human or taking on some sort of body that we can encounter. We'll see some of these avatars in just a minute of Vishnu. Vishnu is an important, somewhat mysterious God. What God isn't mysterious, but anyway, but he's very mysterious. He's less visible than the nature gods that we'll see some of, that preside over the elements like fire and rain and wind and the sun and the moon and that type of thing. Vishnu is the pervader, the divine essence that pervades the universe. He's usually worshipped in the form of an avatar. So let's take a look at some of these. Two of the most famous avatars, and the word avatar literally means descent. That comes from the word to descend. So it's usually understood to be divine descent. Avatars are savior forms of a god that descend to earth to intervene whenever help is needed. So they restore the dharma, the moral order and peace to the earth. And two of Vishnu's, because that's what Vishnu does, right? He's the preserver, right? He preserves everything, restores order and balance. So two of Vishnu's 10 avatars are Rama and Krishna. Probably you've heard both of those names before. Certainly Krishna. There's probably not anybody anywhere who hasn't probably heard about this god Krishna. But he is actually an incarnation, an avatar of Vishnu. Let's talk about Rama first, the one on the left here, who's very blue. Man, I like it. Blue's my favorite color. So anyway, so Rama is one of the most beloved Hindu gods and is the hero of the Hindu epic, which is part of their sacred writings, known as the Ramayana. He's portrayed as an ILD. Let me get my lips and my tongue in sync here. He is portrayed as an ideal son, brother, and husband. He's also portrayed as a king and as a strict adherent to dharma, to duty, to destiny, to the rules of life. Millions of Hindus derive satisfaction from reading and recalling Rama's trials and tribulations as a young prince who was exiled from his kingdom for 14 years. The Ramayana is quite an epic tale, and it's definitely worth the investigation, the read. Then there's Krishna, the cute one on the right here. Now, obviously, he was young. He looks like a little toddler here this way, but if there's one Hindu god's name who is known and recognized throughout the world, it is Krishna. Hindus identify Krishna as the teacher of the sacred scripture called the Bhagavad Gita. You may have heard of, or some of you may have even read parts or even had it assigned as in a course to read the Bhagavad Gita. I actually read it in high school. It was assigned in a high school English class, literature class. So it's a fascinating story. It's very popular. It is the most popular part of all of the Hindu sacred writings is the Bhagavad Gita. And so Krishna is the teacher that is basically relaying the story that's found there. He is also the friend and mentor of Prince Arjuna, who is the hero, the main character in the epic, the Mahabharata. And the Mahabharata is 750,000 verses or sentences. It is the longest piece of literature in the world. It's a huge story. And both the Ramayana, which are mostly about, where Rama is one of the main stars, and the Mahabharata, where Krishna is a significant player, are the two parts of the scriptures that are very much a part of popular Hindu life and culture. As a matter of fact, movies and TV shows and all this type of stuff is made about these stories in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. When I lived in Singapore in the late 1990s, I was teaching at two graduate institutions, two seminaries in Singapore. I was primarily teaching world religion and teaching how to read biblical Hebrew. And I also taught some courses, other courses that were related to different things. I taught some New Testament courses and different things like that. But anyway, while I was there in Singapore, which has a population of around 5 million people on a tiny island that's 15 miles by 30 miles. So it's a city state. It's it's probably the most densely populated place on the earth, but it is extremely highly technical and advanced civilization. And I mean, modern skyscrapers and it's the most modern place on earth. It's just an incredible place to live. But anyway, while I was there, most of the people who live there are originally, their families originally came there from China. The British basically imported the Singaporeans to basically, you ever heard the phrase Shanghaiing somebody? In the 1700s and the 1800s, you could be shanghaied and basically, captured and made a sailor, and you had to serve on a sailing ship. And the British did a lot of this. And Shanghai is on the coast of China, and that's where they went to get a lot of their laborers. They would literally Shanghai them. That's where it comes from, and basically enslaved them, not in chains, but, they would round them up and move the men only. They moved the men only to Singapore, which was a tropical island that was basically only inhabited occasionally by some pirates who only stayed there long enough because they had a great natural port, a great natural harbor. And so anyway, the pirates would only last there a little while. Nobody could stay there because the mosquitoes were so bad. You'd die of dengue fever or malaria or something like that. It was horrible. It was a horrid place to be. But the British wanted the use of that natural harbor for their trade routes. And so they brought in laborers to work the docks who were from China, and males. And then eventually those males, then they brought over, they shanghaied a bunch of females to, that's just the way history happens, to basically, so the males would have somebody to mate with, and they basically put them in brothels. And then eventually, you have families developing. And so, not an auspicious beginning. But by the 1960s, Singapore gets its independence from the British Empire. And so most of the population is Chinese, even though it's literally a quarter of a mile off the coast of Malaysia. And Malaysians are not Chinese, and just a few miles from one of the islands of Indonesia. So, but the population is 80% Chinese because they were basically brought there to work and later became to families. So about 10%, maybe 11% of the population are people who've recently come here, or, in the last 100 years, come there from India to work, to live, to participate. So there was a large Indian population in Singapore, which meant that there was an Indian district in the downtown business area where there were a lot of Indian shops and restaurants. And I absolutely adore Indian food. And the hotter, the better. If I can't feel my tongue or the inside of my mouth, except for the burning, that's what I like. Anyway, I love the flavors of Indian food. Anyway, so I would go down there to eat at the various restaurants that were down there because it was just fantastic. And next to one of the restaurants was a bookshop. And since everybody in Singapore they speak their heart language, Mandarin Chinese, or Tamil, or some Hindu dialect, or various Malaysian dialects, but everybody speaks English. They all get 12 years of English during their schooling, so everybody can speak English. And so I thought, well, maybe I can find something in here that will, that's written from an Indian perspective that's in English that would help me. And there was all kinds of stuff in there. And there was some stuff that was in English, but the thing that I found that was the most helpful were a rack of comic books. And growing up, I lived on Superman and Batman and all the DC and Marvel stuff. Okay, so comic books, the whole graphic approach to it is just something I respond to really well. So I found comic books that had sections of the Ramayana and the story that's in and the Mahabharata in comic form, in English. So you got these thought bubbles above the characters, and so you see, everybody in the dress, and you have to imagine it, so it's painted there for you, and then you can get the basic story. So anyway, now how did I get on that subject? Oh yeah, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana are so popular, they have to produce all this popular material. It's not just theologians or scholars or really serious religious people who this is what is popular, and there's so much of it. They make movies about this and TV shows. It's anyway, Krishna, which is what I was trying to talk about here, is thought to be very delightful. He's full of playfulness, and especially playful pranks. And frankly, as he grows out of this stage here, he's good looking. He gets a little bit bluer in the depictions and other depictions as he gets older. Because blue is understood, has the symbolism of being divine somehow. But anyway, but he's seen as basically a ladies' man. He's part of his playfulness is he's a womanizer. And he basically he's kind of like an Indian cowboy, in the sense that he really goes after the milkmaids, the women who are milking cows and to make butter and yogurt and all that kind of stuff, and cheese and different things like that. And so he's got quite a reputation. This guy gets around, and people don't mind. It's very, very popular. But anyway, he's a delight. And Lord Krishna's promise to humanity is that he will manifest himself and descend to earth whenever Dharma declines. And this belief of his role and trust and faith in his role has sustained Hindu belief in the Supreme Being over thousands of years. So he's very, very popular. Matter of fact, back in the late 60s, before the Beatles broke up, my favorite musical group of all time, the Beatles went to India, and George Harrison, now deceased, but he was the one who was really got interested in Hinduism. And he wasn't a devotee particularly of Krishna. He eventually became a devotee of Kali. That was another deity, but he wrote a song, would have been in 1969, because I heard it on the radio in 1969 when I was at Great Lakes Naval Training Center, just north of Chicago, in basic training for the United States Navy. And I remember I had a little tiny transistor radio, and I remember laying in my bunk with an earphone in, listening to, popular radio, and George Harrison had a song that came out called "My Sweet Lord," and I was really interested in Christianity at that point. I was really exploring who Jesus was and trying to understand all that kind of stuff. And so I thought he was singing about Jesus, my sweet Lord. That's, people talk about the Lord Jesus all the time. So, he's talking about Jesus, until he got to the final chorus, which is Hare Krishna, praise to Krishna, worship Krishna. Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Krishna, Krishna Rama, Rama Krishna. So he's referring to this. So that was my first exposure to both Rama and Krishna, was that song. Anyway, so that's avatars. Now there are also some non-human avatars, but these two are the ones that are probably the most significant and the most popular. All right, let's move on to Shiva, the destroyer. So, and look at the way this guy's pictured. First of all, wow, this guy works out. Looking pretty good. And we all play the look, don't look game. You can't help but look at where his hands are in his lap, and you're thinking, I shouldn't be looking there, right? That's just normal human modesty, or I am looking there, but I'll never admit that I'm looking there. But if you look a little bit lower than where his hands are in his lap, look what he's riding. Look what he's sitting on. He's sitting on what looks like a lion. So this guy is powerful, the way he is portrayed. He's the destroyer. So Rama is the creator, Lord Brahma is the creator, Vishnu is the preserver, and Shiva is the destroyer. He is also extremely popular. The two most popular gods are Vishnu and Shiva. Because they have very important roles to play. So Shiva is the third member of the Trimurti, tasked with destroying the universe in order to prepare for its renewal at the end of each cycle of time. But Shiva's destructive power is regenerative. He destroys in order to give new birth. It is the necessary step that makes renewal possible. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to be reborn. You would just get to the end of your life, and then that's it. Just one life. But you need Shiva there to destroy your life so that you can be reborn. And that's what his role is in all of creation. Lord Brahma creates the world, creates the universe. Shiva preserves it, Vishnu preserves it, and then Shiva is the destroyer. He's also the Lord of the dance, the god, the avenger. So you need justice. This is the guy. I don't think I would be calling on Krishna, particularly in that cute little pose that we saw of him, up here. If I need vengeance, if I need somebody to stand up for me and to intervene in life, I'm probably not going to be calling on Krishna. He might be a great buddy and full of laughs and all that kind of stuff. Might be good as a wingman going out to shop for chicks. You know, just being silly or facetious. But boy, if you need somebody who's really got power, who can bring about judgment, there he is. So, but that judgment, which results in destruction, is also the chance for a new life. So Hindus customarily invoke Shiva before the beginning of any religious or spiritual endeavor. They believe that any bad vibrations in the immediate vicinity of worship are eliminated by the mere utterance of praise, or of his praise, or of his name. All you got to do is just say the word, and that dispels the negative. Very, very powerful. Okay, let's take a look at some other gods here. That means this is not all of them, but it is some of them. So the one over here on, you're not seeing my arrow there. Okay, that's right. Okay, but anyway, top left-hand corner is Ganapati, also known as Ganesha or Ganesh. The removal of obstacles. This is the elephant-headed deity. He's actually Shiva's first son. Lord Ganapati, who has an elephant head, occupies a very special place in the hearts of Hindus, because they consider him to be the remover of obstacles. So, he's, whatever's in your way, he's a fixer. He can remove whatever obstacle that you're encountering in life. So, he has a real important, and people, value and Ganesha, Ganapati Ganesha, very, very popular. You run into little images of them in people's homes, in their cars, on their desk. Even here in the United States, if often you'll have someone, if you take a Lyft or an Uber, people often have stuff hanging from either on their dashboard. In the car all day, you need something to focus you or to remind you of something, or they have something hanging from their rearview mirror. Sometimes it's their tassel from graduation, because that's what they want to think about, is they have the horrible job of just navigating traffic and getting paid pennies to it's not the greatest, most inspiring job in the world to be a driver. So people put up something in front of them they can think of, so they realize that they're not just a driver. Some people will hang a cross from their rearview mirror, or something else, or maybe it's just a little bobblehead that they put on their. I'm just talking about average people, right? They put on their dash just to kind of give them a sense of whimsy, something to smile at, right? We all do these kind of things. We decorate with what we're interested in or what pleases us. Well, if you get in very often, because there are an awful lot of people who are from Indian extraction, who are here in the United States. And so I've seen Ganesha on a lot of dashes. I've seen little versions of him hanging from rearview mirrors. Because boy, if there's any place you need a remover of obstacles, it's when you're in traffic. So nice to be able to envision that by seeing the representation. So very, very popular. Saraswati, now she's the goddess of learning, the goddess of knowledge. And you saw in the video all the stuff that took place at the boys' school. All those ceremonies were for Saraswati, the goddess of knowledge, and they had made a large image of her. And at the end of that whole celebration, they went and dunked the image in the pond. And the boys were out there swimming, and they were dunking the image, because they knew that the image was just made out of clay. Yes, there's this understanding that the deity comes and takes up residence in the image and sees you through the image, and you see the deity through it. But when you're finished with it, it's just a lump of clay, so they were getting rid of it. So that was a very playful, interesting time. Can you imagine if somebody walked into a church or a synagogue or a mosque or any other place and took some extremely important sacred object and took it out and threw it in a pond? What would be our normal reaction to that? We'd go, oh, but they didn't feel that way at all. It was really quite beautiful. I really enjoyed it. But that's Saraswati. Very, very significant. Female deity. And female deities, hopefully I'm going to talk about in a minute, in general, can seem to be the power of the male deities, which is an interesting thing. You know, often people talk about the reason that women are so poorly treated in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam is because God is seen as a male. God has a male gender, is addressed as a male, is imagined or understood to be masculine. And so that's why women aren't valued. Strangely enough, in Hinduism, the women have greater value. The female deities are where the men get their actual power. They're powerless without their female deities, without their consorts, without their partners. We'll talk about that in a minute. But yet Hinduism has a really low regard for women. So we have to come to get a different reason for what are they thinking? Well, it's not about the nature of deity. It's something else, which we'll talk about next week. Anyway, here's Lakshmi, the goddess of good fortune. Then you have to the right, you have Durga Devi, the restorer of moral order, or Dharva, another female, very powerful female deity. Then the bottom left-hand corner, you've got Indra, king of heaven, Lord of gods. Now, Indra is a very ancient, one of the very, very, very ancient deities. I mean, none of them ever go away, but Indra still maintains a real present focus for people. He's the king of heaven, the Lord of the gods. Surya, the sun, another ancient conceptualization of deity, of the sun, but very, very popular. Agni, the god of fire, the fire god. Agni is, clearly Agni, thousands of years ago, whatever seemed beyond our explanation, we thought it was divine, magical, miraculous, supernatural. That's what we call it, right? And so fire was worshipped. It came out of the heavens, hit a tree. Oh my goodness, now we got fire. And and fire was important. And so Agni is the fire god. Then here's another example here of a more recent god, not recent like a couple hundred years, but last couple of thousand years, is Hanuman, the monkey god, the monkey king. And he's known as a devoted servant, very, very popular. Matter of fact, if you visit Indonesia, which is predominantly Muslim, matter of fact, Indonesia, the 1,000 islands that make up the nation of Indonesia, there are more Muslims in Indonesia than there are in all of the Middle East. There are over 215 million Muslims in Indonesia alone. It's the most populous most populous Muslim nation in the world. So, most people in Indonesia are Muslim. But on Bali, which is this place where Westerners love to go because it's beautiful and it's a great vacation. The water is beautiful and clear. The weather is perfect. It's just an idyllic place. But in Bali, one of the more popular gods among the people who are Hindu who live there is Hanuman. He's the most popular god on the island of Bali. And I learned that from somebody who lived there for a number of years, who told me that. And then also when I was living in Singapore, my religion professor from my graduate school came to Singapore on his way because he had promised to take his wife on a trip to Bali, but by stopping in Singapore and a couple other places and speaking at various institutions, and I invited him to come speak at the institution I was teaching at, he was able to write off part of his trip and get actually part of it paid for. So it made for, he could afford to stay in Bali. And we talked about the fact that he was going to be seeing Hanuman. Anyway, so this is just a sampling of some of the other guys. You can go to these websites and see a whole lot more. And there's obviously a whole lot more, but it really helps to be able to get a picture of this stuff instead of just trying to imagine this stuff. All right, so let's continue on in our discussion of this concept of divinity. You see at the bottom of the screen here, it says the Trimurti. This is the Trinity that I was referring to. The Sanskrit word is Trimurti, this threesome. Lord Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, Shiva, the destroyer. And above it, I've got Brahman, who isn't a god. Brahman is. Brahman is being itself, not a being. And we normally think of Hinduism then as being either having both monistic sense to it of Brahman, and the deities, the millions of gods, being manifestations of Brahman, expressions, emanations of Brahman. And we generally refer to this kind of messy system as polytheism, because the individual gods are theisms, right? They're beings. They are gods, they're God beings, not just being itself. And we normally call that polytheism. And that's a good description of the overall circumstances. But in reality, the concept that the average Hindu has is they're not worshiping all of these gods. They respect whatever manifestation of the divine they see. They respect it when they see it in another person, because another person has Atman in them, and Atman is Brahman. So that's this universal respect for life. And Atman is also in creatures and in everything that exists. Atman is being, right? But anyway, so, but they don't, you can't, it's just kind of like, you know, you may say, I'm interested in, I love, fill in the blank, male, men, or women. You know, whatever it is that you love, whatever it is you're attracted to. Well, there's a whole bunch, you know, there are probably 4 billion of each of those categories that if you want to pick someone to love in the world, and, you know, how are you going to worship? How are you going to relate to all 4 billion of them? How are you going to relate to 10 of them? That's impossible, right? It's just ridiculously impossible. But what you do is you pick one, and that becomes your companion, your mate. And the two of you essentially become one, and you are one with that person is one with you, one at a time. You know, I recognize that can change, but, you know, when you're making that connection, it's just the two of you. So that's what we would refer to as picking one out of the many, but it's not saying that everybody else sucks. It's just saying this is the one that attracts me the most. That's what happens in Hinduism. Hindus, from a practical standpoint, you can't worship Brahman. Brahman, you can't, how do you relate to something that there's no attribute to relate to? You can't. So you pick one of the gods that you're going to commit to, and you worship that god. And that's picking one out of the many. And that's what we refer to as henotheism. So heno means like first, second, third, and fourth. They're all contenders, but who's your first choice? And that's the one that you focus on. So when you talk to a Hindu and they say, well, how many gods do you worship? and they'll say, well, first of all, God is one. Now they're referring to Brahman. They're thinking that you're asking about Brahma. Well, Brahman is one, and Brahman, you know, that's the one, but you can't worship that. So their other answer would be when they say, oh, do you mean my personal connection? Yeah. Oh, that would be Krishna or Rama or Vishnu or Shiva or Lakshmi or whoever it is, right? You pick one and you give your devotion that one. This is what we refer to as bhakti yoga. We'll get to that next week. But that's what's going on here with all this. You cannot relate to all these deities, but Hindus, now in the West, we pick our God and we immediately attack the gods that other people pick that aren't ours. Right? And we get into arguments, even among ourselves, about who's really God. And you know, and we, you know, and you'll hear these type of things, oh, they worship a false god. Hindus don't think that way. They're all everything is a manifestation of deity. So any god is a good thing. And so you don't diss it, you don't talk bad about it, you don't disrespect it. You respect the divine wherever you encounter it, but your personal connection is to one deity. Does that make sense? Hopefully nod your head if it does. Okay, I got a thumbs up. Thank you very much. All right, so that's what I'm trying to communicate here. So, henotheism is probably the best description. In the vast array of gods, there is one God more powerful or more important. And typically, very often they'll say Vishnu or Shiva or someone related to Vishnu or Shiva. It's kind of like, you know, there's some sort of connection there. But so this is the idea. There isn't this exclusivism that exists in the rest of the world's religions where we say we're the ones who have the true God and everybody else is deceived, worshiping something false. Hinduism is very open-minded because everything is personal. You can't blame your circumstances on anyone else. Your circumstances, everything you experience in life that is good or bad, is the result of the choices that you've made in all your previous lives. That's karma. So you can't blame anybody else. And by the same token, so you just, it means that there's an openness. So when missionaries in the late 1700s and early 1800s, and the British missionaries primarily, there were other missionaries, Christian missionaries who got to India, and they came in and were talking about Jesus being God. That's what you expect them to talk about, right? And Hindus go, oh, this sounds very interesting. We will worship Jesus. And the missionaries at first probably got excited about this. Hey, you know, I talked to 10 people today. All 10 of them said, yes, Jesus sounds good. We should worship Jesus. Jesus sounds divine. That sounds good. Yes, I like this. This is really good. But they're not abandoning all the other gods. Of course, the Christian missionaries say, no, recognize that Jesus is the only God and all these others are false. Well, no. No, was basically the answer. No, that's not the way we think. This Jesus looks really cool. Yeah, we like him, and we'll respect him. We'll recognize the divinity that's in Jesus. It's a different way of thinking. It's a different way of understanding. It's a different way of viewing the universe, viewing reality. So divinity is found at many levels, in many forms, many values. And by and large, divinities that we can identify relate to life experiences. All right, there's one other thing here I want to talk about, and this is, nope, I'm gonna have to save this till Monday because we're out of time. So I do want to talk about the female element, the feminine in the divine, because it is very important and very important. Your book talks about it. about Devi Durga as the great goddess, this whole idea of Shaktism. This is the female power and the importance of the female in the understanding of what is the divine manifestation in the universe. So we've already mentioned briefly Saraswati, but we're going to talk about Lakshmi and Kali and Parvati, Durga and Raja, and a bunch of others. But we'll do that next week.